Oh, daughter-in-law, we left our wallet at home, and our cards too. My in-laws laughed when the $3,000 family dinner bill arrived. But their laughter stopped when I calmly said, I married Andrew, driven not only by love, but also by a vague hope of creating the very real family I had missed so much in my childhood. My own parents, mired in endless quarrels and mutual resentments, were never able to give me a sense of warmth and security. Andrew, with his gentle nature and seeming unsuitability for life, seemed to me like a child in need of my care and support. And I, accustomed to taking responsibility since childhood, gladly accepted this role. At first, everything went well. Andrew was an attentive and caring husband, although somewhat immature. He often consulted with his mother on any matter, but this did not bother me much. I attributed it to his close relationship with his family and hoped that over time he would become more independent. However, it soon became clear that my financial situation was indeed more stable than Andrew's. He worked as a manager in a small firm, earned a decent salary, but spent it mainly on his hobbies: fishing, hunting, expensive gadgets. I, on the other hand, held the position of financial director in a large company, earned significantly more, and knew how to manage money rationally. From the first years of marriage, my in-laws, Lydia and Stephen, began to regularly organize joint celebrations. At first, they were modest family gatherings, but over time the scale of the events grew. Birthdays, anniversaries, wedding anniversaries, every occasion was celebrated with a flourish, with numerous relatives and friends invited. And each time, one way or another, the expenses for food, gifts, and restaurants fell on my shoulders. Lydia knew how to delicately but persistently hint that, oh, Olivia, you are better at budgeting, or Andrew does not understand these things at all, and you are so smart. Andrew, as a rule, silently agreed with his mother, considering it quite normal. You earn more, it is not difficult for you, he often said, not thinking about what was hidden behind these words. At first, I did not object. I wanted to be a good wife and daughter-in-law. I wanted to be loved and accepted into the family. I sincerely tried to please my in-laws, bought them expensive gifts, organized parties, paid the bills at restaurants. It seemed to me a small price to pay for peace and harmony in the family. But over time, the amount of expenses reached enormous proportions. Regular trips abroad, expensive furniture, household appliances, renovations in my in-laws' apartment, all of this was paid for from my pocket. I tried not to conflict, not to make scandals for the sake of peace in the family. It seemed to me that if I remained silent and endured, everything would work out. Andrew would become more independent, and my in-laws more grateful. But time went on, and nothing changed. Andrew continued to be immature and dependent on his mother, and Lydia continued to take my financial help for granted. Moreover, her appetite grew every day. She increasingly turned to me with requests for money, hiding behind concern for her son and grandchildren. I felt dissatisfaction growing inside me. I worked tirelessly to provide not only for myself and my husband, but also for his parents. I denied myself many things, saved on clothes and entertainment to pay for others' pleasures. It became increasingly difficult for me to hide my irritation. At times, memories of my childhood would overwhelm me. I remembered how hard my mother worked to feed the family. My father, who was always away at work, took almost no part in raising the children and did not help with the housework. I learned early on that if I wanted to achieve something in life, I had to rely only on myself. Perhaps that is why I tried so hard to please Andrew's family. I wanted to create the very ideal family that I never had. I wanted to be loved and valued, for my efforts to be noticed and appreciated. But instead, I felt like just a cash cow, being used for their own selfish purposes. I remembered the day Lydia asked me to pay for a trip to a sanatorium for herself and Stephen. Olivia, my back is killing me, she complained. The doctors say I need to go to a sanatorium urgently. But Stephen and I have no money at all. You know what pensions are like these days. I silently took out my card and paid for the trip, but inside, everything was boiling with indignation. I knew this was crossing all boundaries. I could no longer tolerate this injustice. I often remembered my grandmother's words, "Do not let anyone walk all over you, my dear, or you will be carrying someone else's burden your whole life." My grandmother was a wise woman and always spoke the truth to your face. I regretted not listening to her advice sooner. And now, on the eve of my mother-in-law's anniversary, I realized that I could not live like this anymore. I decided to put an end to this financial exploitation. I thought for a long time about how to do it without offending Andrew and destroying the family. But then I realized that I had no other choice. I had to protect myself and my interests. I prepared for the anniversary in advance. I decided that at the banquet I would reveal the truth and announce the end of my sponsorship. I knew that my act would cause a scandal and have serious consequences, but I was ready for it. I was no longer afraid of losing Andrew and his family. I realized that my own happiness and well-being were more important than anything. On the day of the anniversary, I felt unusually calm and confident. I knew I was making the right choice. I was no longer a victim, but a strong and independent woman who was in charge of her own life. I was ready for a new life, full of opportunities and prospects. The guests were seated at tables decorated with flowers and candles. The hall was filled with a festive atmosphere. Laughter and lively conversations intertwined with quiet music. The tables were laden with mountains of exquisite dishes from which an appetizing aroma emanated. Lydia and Stephen sat at the head of the table, basking in attention and congratulations. Lydia, in her elegant dress, beamed with pleasure, accepting numerous compliments and gifts. Stephen, as always, was more reserved, but a contented smile also played on his face. Andrew sat next to me, occasionally casting anxious glances at me. For some reason, he felt tension and awkwardness. I sat upright, smiling reservedly. A hurricane of emotions was raging inside me, but on the outside, I appeared calm and collected. I felt like a stranger at this celebration of life, as if I were watching what was happening from the sidelines. All these smiles, toasts, and false compliments seemed unbearable to me. I could no longer pretend and play the role of a happy and grateful wife. Time passed. The guests raised their glasses, wishing the Jubilarians many years of a happy life together. Lydia gladly accepted the congratulations, not forgetting to mention how much she had done for her family and how much everyone loved her. Stephen modestly nodded in response, letting his wife be the center of attention. Andrew also raised a toast, thanking his parents for everything they had done for him. He spoke of their love, care, and wisdom. I listened to his words with a bitter smile. It seemed to me that he lived in some parallel world where money appeared out of nowhere, and I was just an appendage to his prosperous life. After the toasts, the waiters began to serve the main courses. The guests eagerly ate the delicacies, discussing the latest news and high society gossip. Lydia did not miss an opportunity to boast about her successes and achievements, talking about her travels, expensive purchases, and influential acquaintances. I silently listened to her, feeling anger and disgust growing inside me. Finally, when everyone was full and a little relaxed, the bill was brought. The waiter politely handed it to Lydia. As always, she glanced at the amount and casually remarked, "Oh, daughter-in-law, as always you pay." Silence fell in the hall. All eyes turned to me. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. Everyone was used to me always paying. I calmly looked at my mother-in-law. There was no fear or guilt in my eyes, only determination and fatigue. I slowly took out a box from my purse where the gift envelopes the guests had brought for the Jubilarians were and began to count the money. "There are $3,000 here," I announced calmly, counting the money aloud. "This will be enough to pay the bill." Then I took out a pre-prepared folder from my large bag. It was the same folder where I kept all the checks, statements, and receipts confirming my financial investments in my husband's family over the past few years. "And this," I said, holding up the folder, "is a small addition to your anniversary." I opened the folder and began to slowly turn the pages, showing all present the numerous documents. Here are all my expenses for your family for the last year. Grocery shopping, utility bills, car repairs, gifts, trips, entertainment. Everything you love so much. A dead silence fell in the hall. The guests looked at me with amazement, not understanding what was happening. Lydia's face turned purple with anger and indignation. Andrew sat as if paralyzed, unable to utter a word. Stephen lowered his eyes, feeling awkward and ashamed. I continued to speak. My voice sounded calm and confident, although inside everything was trembling with excitement. The total amount of my expenses for the year is almost $15,000. $15,000 that I earned with my own labor and that you spent on your pleasures without thinking about how hard it was for me to get it. I paused, looking around at the faces of those present. And today I want to announce that I am no longer going to pay for other people's pleasures. I am tired of being your cash cow, your financial safety net. I want to live my own life, do what I like, and spend money on myself. Lydia froze as if turned to stone. Stephen seemed to shrink into his chair, trying to become invisible. Andrew looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He blinked frequently, as if he could not believe his ears. The silence in the hall was so thick that it seemed you could cut it with a knife. I got up from the table, leaving a half-eaten piece of cake on the plate. I felt dozens of gazes on me, but I tried not to pay attention to them. The main thing was that I had done what I had to do. The words had been spoken, the cards were on the table. Now I just had to wait for the consequences. Andrew finally came to his senses. He jumped up from his chair, almost knocking over a glass of wine. Olivia, what are you doing? He croaked, looking at me reproachfully. Why did you wear all this in public? I stopped, turned to him, and calmly replied, because it concerns everyone. And because I can no longer be silent. I saw confusion and misunderstanding in his eyes. Andrew was never used to solving problems. He always preferred to hide behind his mother's or his wife's back. Now he was face to face with reality, and he clearly did not like this reality. Lydia woke up from her stupor. An expression of anger, which I had seen many times, appeared on her face. How dare you, she hissed, rising from her seat. You ruined the party. You disgraced us in front of the guests. I sighed. I knew it would be like this. Lydia would never admit her guilt. She would always find a way to shift it onto someone else. I did not want to disgrace anyone, I replied, trying to remain calm. I just told the truth. The truth that you all preferred to ignore. Lydia snorted contemptuously. The truth? Your truth? You are just jealous of our happiness. You think we do not see how you look at Andrew? You want to turn him against us. I felt anger boiling inside me. I had endured these humiliations, these manipulations, these constant reproaches for so many years. But now I was not going to be silent. I want Andrew to be independent, I replied, looking straight into Lydia's eyes. For him to make his own decisions, earn his own money, be responsible for his own life. And you just keep him in a golden cage, depriving him of the opportunity to become a real man. Lydia raised her hand to slap me, but Andrew managed to catch it. Mom, stop, he said, looking at her with a plea. Please, that is enough. Lydia pulled her hand away and turned away from him. You are weak, she hissed. She made you this way. I shook my head. It was not me, Lydia, it was you. You always controlled his every step, his every decision. You did not give him a chance to grow up. Stephen, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. Lydia, maybe Olivia is right, he said quietly. Maybe we should think about it. Lydia turned to him with contempt. You have always been a doormat, she said. And now you have decided to betray me. Stephen lowered his head and fell silent again. I felt sorry for him. He was as much a hostage of this situation as I was. I looked at Andrew. He stood with his head bowed, silent. I saw two conflicting feelings fighting within him, love for his mother. I understood that it was very difficult for him now, but I also understood that he had to make a choice. I am no longer going to pay for other people's pleasures, I repeated, this time quieter, but with even more confidence. The words sounded like a verdict. I saw how the guests who had been chatting animatedly before now avoided looking me in the eye. Awkwardness, like a thick fog, enveloped the hall. Someone coughed, someone ostentatiously pushed their plate away. Everyone understood that they had witnessed something more than just a family quarrel. It was the shattering of illusions, the exposure of a lie that had been hidden for many years under the mask of well-being. Andrew still could not find anything to say. For the first time in his life, he could not hide behind his mother's broad back, could not mumble something unintelligible, hoping that the problem would resolve itself. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. He had never seen me like this. All these years, he had taken me for granted, as a reliable source of income, as a woman ready to sacrifice herself for the sake of the family. And suddenly this woman rebelled. I felt empty, but at the same time free, as if a huge weight that had been pressing on me for years had been lifted from my shoulders. I looked at Andrew one more time. A spark flickered in his eyes, something like regret, but that was not enough. It was too late. I am leaving, I said quietly, but so that everyone could hear. I did not say goodbye, did not explain. Everything had already been said. I just turned and headed for the exit. Behind me, I heard muffled voices, snatches of phrases. Lydia had finally come to her senses and was shouting something angrily. Andrew tried to say something, but his voice was lost in the general hubbub. I did not turn around. I walked out of the restaurant and breathed in the fresh night air. The city was bustling, living its usual life as if nothing had happened. But for me, this evening was a turning point. I had crossed the line that separated me from a new life. Arriving at my apartment, I felt a strange relief. This was the apartment I had bought before getting married. I had always kept it just in case, as a safe harbor where I could return if something went wrong. And now that case had come. The apartment met me with silence and peace. There was no screaming luxury imposed by Lydia, no things bought on credit to match a status. Here were only my things, my books, my favorite photographs. I went into the bedroom and sat on the bed. I felt exhausted but did not want to sleep. Fragments of memories, faces, words swirled in my head. I remembered my childhood, my mother who worked 2 jobs to feed the family. I remembered how I had dreamed of a strong, loving family, of a home where mutual understanding and support reigned. And how wrong I had been. I sat in the dark for a long time, going over the events of the last few years in my memory. I remembered how gradually, step by step, I had allowed my husband's family to walk all over me, how I had justified their laziness and irresponsibility, how I had turned a blind eye to their manipulations. I thought that if I was good enough, generous enough, I would win their love and recognition. But instead, I had become just a cash cow, a source of income that could be used indefinitely. The next day, I woke up with a sense of determination. I knew that many difficulties lay ahead, but I was ready for them. I called my lawyer and asked him to start the divorce proceedings. I no longer wanted anything to do with Andrew and his family. Then I called work and asked for a vacation. I needed time to recover, to sort out my thoughts and feelings, to understand what I wanted from life. In the following days, I was busy putting my affairs in order. I reviewed my financial plans, reissued my insurance policies, and closed my joint accounts with Andrew. I felt as if I were preparing for a long journey. I also started taking care of myself. I signed up for yoga, started going to the pool, and met up with friends I had not seen in a long time. I tried to fill my life with new impressions, new emotions, new people. It was not easy. I often thought of Andrew, of our years together, of our dreams and hopes. I asked myself, could I have done things differently? Could I have saved our marriage? But then I remembered how they had used me, how they had deceived me, how they had not valued me, and I knew I had made the right choice. A few weeks later, I felt that I was beginning to recover. I returned to work, full of energy and enthusiasm. I threw myself into my projects, started spending more time with my colleagues and clients. I felt that I was living again, that I was breathing fully again. One evening, Andrew called me. I hesitated for a long time before answering. "Olivia," he said in a quiet, guilty voice. I wanted to apologize. I was silent. I did not know what to say. "I know I was wrong," Andrew continued. "I was blind. I was stupid. I let my mom manipulate me. I did not appreciate you. I am very sorry." I felt something warm stir in my heart. I wanted to forgive him, to believe in his sincerity. But I knew it was impossible. Too much water had passed under the bridge. Too much pain had been caused. "Andrew," I said quietly, "I appreciate your apology. But I think it is over for us. We have become too different. We want different things from life. I wish you all the best." I hung up and cried. I was not crying for Andrew, not for the lost marriage. I was crying because my dream of a happy family had not come true. But through my tears, I saw a glimmer of hope. I realized that my life was not over, that many new and interesting things awaited me. I realized that I was a strong and independent woman, capable of building my life the way I wanted. And I smiled. I smiled at my new dawn. Lydia never came to terms with the loss of her cash cow. She tried to manipulate Andrew into getting me back, but he no longer fell for her tricks. He knew he had to live his own life, to take responsibility for his own actions. Stephen, as always, silently watched the proceedings. He never interfered in his wife's and son's affairs, but deep down, he was glad that I had left. He had always felt that I was unhappy in their family. Andrew got another job, started living independently, renting a small apartment. He tried to be a good son, but he no longer allowed his mother to control his life. He started seeing a therapist to deal with his problems and complexes. He often thought of me. He knew that he had lost not just a wife, but a loyal friend, a loving person, a reliable support. He knew that he himself was to blame for this, and that nothing could be fixed. But he did not lose hope. He believed that one day, when he became a different person, worthy of her love, I might be able to forgive him. He was not rushing things. He was just trying to become a better person. Time passed. I built a successful career, bought a new apartment, and made new friends. I was happy and independent. But there was always a place for love in my heart. I believed that one day I would meet a man who would love me not for my money, but for who I am. And maybe someday, our paths with Andrew would cross again. But that would be a completely different story.